Well, good morning and welcome to the first ever Talon Talks. I'm hoping it's the first of many. As Stephanie mentioned, I served as editor-in-chief of the Patriot Talon before graduating last year. It's a pleasure to be back here at UT Tyler to be talking about the thing that was most important on my mind a year ago and is probably the most important thing on every student's mind in the room, which is what happens when you leave here and go to get a job. So we've got a great group of panelists here who are going to share their expertise in that subject. I want to introduce Tom Mullins, who's the president and CEO of the Tyler Economic Development Council, the Tyler Area Chamber of Commerce. Served in those positions for decades now, and the city has received many accolades in terms of economic development under his tenure. Also want to introduce Terrence Dixon, who is a vice president for human resources at Brookshire Grocery Company. I think everybody is probably familiar with Brookshire's, but you may not know that there's over 150 stores. They have 14,000 employees, which they refer to as partners at Brookshire's. So he's going to share his insight in managing a group that large. I also want to thank Tom Wilkin for being here. He's Vice President for Human Resources at Trinity Mother Frances. The medical community in Tyler and East Texas is a huge source of employment. It's a huge job industry here. As we know at UT Tyler, we have an enormous nursing program, one of the largest in the state. So a very important topic and a very relevant person to have here to discuss that area. We also want to thank Gary Bass for being here from Eastman Chemical Company. He oversees human resources for their Texas operations. They're a very large company with a lot of talent to oversee. So we appreciate his perspective that he brings with us. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and get started. I'd like to start with the question for you, Mr. Mullins. With your expertise about the job market and experience in working in East Texas, what are some of the industries that are thriving here and are going to be looking to add talent in the coming years?
Thanks, Andy, and thanks for inviting me today. Appreciate being able to participate in this panel. I've worked with some of the folks on the panel before, and available skilled workers is a big issue. You know, in fact, the jobs that I have are two business association jobs. The Tyler Economic Development Council is a member-supported organization, started back in 1989. The Chamber of Commerce is like 115 years old, also a business member organization. For them to be successful, they have to be able to find talent. They really have to know that they're going to be investing in an area, a geographical area, Tyler, Smith County, East Texas, where they can find workforce and people with skills and people who are willing to be educated, people who are willing to be trained. And Tyler's very fortunate. We've had a constant upward growth over the last 20 years particularly, and now we've seen more diversification. I'd say the niche or the obvious opportunities for Tyler and Smith County is, of course, medical, and Tom's going to talk to that. A lot of people don't know that the labor market in Tyler, Smith County, or let's just say Tyler, because the population of Tyler Smith County combined is almost 250,000 now. It's 220,000. The population of Tyler is about half of that, 108, 110,000. The workforce for Tyler is 106,000. So that tells you people are coming in from a large area around Tyler to work. Out of that 106,000, medical employs directly 20,000. And indirectly almost 9,000. So almost 30% of the workforce is connected to medical. Another thing that I'm really proud of, and I think will position us well to grow into the future, Tyler currently has 20,000 full-time college students. You have about 7,500 on this campus, you got 12,000 over TJC, and you've got another 1,000 at Texas College. That tells employers that they can get people educated and employable if they come to Tyler, Texas. And then the last point I'll make, Andy, is we're seeing a real rapid growth in technology-related jobs. Communications, IT, software, internet. In fact, we took a booth and some high-tech companies down to Austin about a week ago to the South by Southwest Technology Trade Show and talked about the advantages of technology companies coming to Tyler, Texas. And we've got 20 different leads from companies around the country that received that message and are now talking to us about the possibility of making an investment here. So anything in those kinds of technologies are going to be opportunities for students to get into.
Well, I'm curious more specifically with the companies that are represented in the industries that are represented here. I'd like to just go down the line of our panelists, starting with you, Mr. Dixon. What type of positions are available that you are looking to fill now and anticipate looking to fill within your own organization?
Thank you for having me. Andy, great question. We operate retail supermarket stores, and so the vast majority of our positions are within that sector of our business. And so we have a wide array of entry-level positions, but also we have our corporate operations based here in Tyler as well. And so we have a full suite of professional level positions as well in that area of our business. And so at any given time, we're always looking for quality individuals to come and work for us. I spend a lot of time in the retail sector, and so, therefore I encourage a lot of folks to look at opportunities in that side of our business. There really are lots of opportunities there that I think the general public just doesn't necessarily know all the value. Many of you hopefully shop in our stores, and hopefully you see the level of training and emphasis that we place on customer service, but we also place a lot of emphasis on being good business people. It's pretty tough to manage a supermarket, and I was talking with one of our fellow panelists here. We look at everyone as our competitor, anyone who is in a retail operation, because now the convenience stores sell groceries, the pharmacy stores sell groceries, the hardware stores sell groceries. I mean, and so we're competing for that same talent pool. And so again, most of our opportunities really are on the retail side of our business. You can very easily start very entry level and advance into higher management level careers. But also, if that's not your forte or your area of interest, again, we have a full suite of areas in our corporate offices, from our legal, our financial, our IT, our human resources areas. So again, a wide array of positions.
Thank you as well for having me. And you know, what I like to talk about when I think of and talk about healthcare is it's really a profession or an organization where you can find pretty much any type of job in healthcare that you study for. So I'll have, you know, the typical technical jobs, and so nursing, which obviously is a biggest part of my workforce. And I have, you know, probably in total 75% of my workforce are going to be folks who have that technical or clinical skill and background, be it in pharmacy or in therapy or imaging and things like that. And so a lot of people, when they think about healthcare, that's kind of where their mind goes to first. But I always like to remind folks that, you know, also within healthcare, I'm gonna have architects, because as we do construction, then, you know, obviously that's going to come into play, or engineers, or a lot of our folks that work in the business sector. You know, a lot of the insurance programs require backgrounds in accounting or in finance, and as we think about strategic planning, you know, we have individuals who have backgrounds in economics and again, just overall, you know, planning type of marketing kind of skill sets. And so when I talk about really what's it like to work in healthcare, it really is something that is and should be appealing to everyone, because you can find roles within healthcare. And then the other piece is, you know, similar to what Terrence was saying, is that there's always opportunities to move up. And I think a lot of times people will kind of look at an organization and think they got to kind of start at the top, so to speak. If I graduated with a degree in X, then I got to go find a job with a degree in X. And you know, my advice to folks is to get that job you want to, that you really aspire to. Sometimes you got to kind of start a little bit on the lower side, if you will, to learn the business. And you know, I've worked for several organizations, and the CEO of each of those organizations started in those entry-level technical jobs, either an imaging technician, you know, 20, 30 years ago, and you know, progressed and learned the business. And there's a lot of value and credibility that an individual gains when they have done that and kind of worked their way up and learned the organization.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. It's always great to come to a college campus. There's always so much energy on it. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to go back to school or anything, but I always enjoy going to a college campus. I represent a company in more of the industrial manufacturing sector. We produce 40 to 50 different chemicals at Eastman Chemical Company. They go into a variety of markets, and so mainly the workforce and the jobs that we have available are number one in the more the manufacturing side, chemical process operators, maintenance mechanics, that sort of thing. For an area, a population that maybe take a 2-year associate's degree and then get trained in our apprentice program on site. So that's one section that we need to keep getting a good educated workforce, and I think we're doing a good job finding those, at least in our area around Longview and East Texas. And then the other part that we recruit quite heavily is more of the technical side, because it is a chemical company. We have a lot of opportunities for chemical, mechanical, electrical, and civil engineers. So we're heavy on the engineering recruiting side as well. And I don't know if further questions will drill down into this or not, but especially with the baby boomer generation leaving the workforce here over the next, well, they've already started leaving, but over the next 5 or 10 years, it's just going to be a massive exit of people that went to work in the 70s and 80s. There are going to be many opportunities for bachelor degreed, 4-year technical degreed people to come in and fill all of those gaps of the baby boomers that are leaving.
Thank you. And, Mr. Bass, I'm glad that you brought up specific degrees. Here at UT Tyler, I think most people are working toward a bachelor's degree. We have some in our graduate programs as well. But it seems like now more than ever, a bachelor's degree has become sort of the standard or the baseline for what is expected of a job applicant. I'm curious as to what portion of the jobs that you typically see available require at least a bachelor degree.
Let me start, if I can, because
Sure.
I realize I'm at a college campus, so maybe I won't get too many eggs thrown at me when I say this. Not everyone is cut out for a college degree, and a lot of the jobs that are out there, you don't have to have a 4-year degree for it. In fact, if you get a good technical training, especially for manufacturing jobs, it might be an associate degree or something of that nature. You can have a really good career doing manufacturing jobs, for instance. But anything from a technical or a business interest as far as going to work for a company, and I'll be anxious to hear the rest of them comment on that. Bachelor degree certainly is a minimum to sort of get you in the door. Now, once you get in the door, your interest in where you can go there can take off. And Tom mentioned that just a second ago. You can get into all sorts of different things that you never thought of before. I've reinvented myself 2 or 3 times over a 33-year career, and these guys have probably done the same. But at a minimum, for your higher end technical and business jobs, you're going to have that 4-year degree.
Healthcare, as I'd mentioned, has a lot of different types of roles, and so as you think about the nursing profession as a starting point, and I know knowing UT Tyler has the focus on the bachelor's degree, but for us, if you just look at percentages, we're probably about 50-50 in terms of our registered nurses. Half of them having a 4-year bachelor's degree, and about half having an ADN and associate's degree. Where I would say the profession of nursing is headed, and those of you in the nursing school would probably agree, and which is why you're going for your 4-year degree, is that the nursing profession is heading towards more of the bachelor's prepared nurses for the critical thinking skills and the value that bachelor's degree brings. But again, as I think about just the types and numbers of jobs, I do have a large number of my nursing population who is has the 2-year ADN degree. And there's also a lot of the clinical professionals that are the kind of the on-the-job training. I think the perfect example of that is a lot of the imaging kind of positions, X-ray and the like. A lot of learning on the job, getting skills, getting certifications that are not necessarily degreed positions. And again, as I think about percentage, I would say probably about 30% of my positions require a bachelor's degree because there are so many of those technical certification skills. But as you think about the types of jobs that are degreed, obviously the pharmacist jobs or the therapies, the speech or OT or PT, those are going to require bachelor's and then some. As I get outside of the technical world, the bachelor's degree becomes more prevalent. And if it's, in my IT world, I think, as I think about the number of employees or individuals I'm hiring now that have IT skills, it's only going to increase. If you read anything in the news about healthcare and where it's headed, you hear a lot of talk about something called an electronic medical record and the manner with which you want to maintain the history, the medical history of someone, regardless of who their provider is, and that's all contingent upon being able to have their medical information follow them. And those of you who spent any time in trying to build an infrastructure related to information technology realize that is a very complicated thing to be able to do within a hospital with multiple clinics, much less across organizations, across hospitals. And so from a degreed standpoint, we have a lot of, I will see an increase in the number of individuals in information technology who require a bachelor's degree. My business office, the analysts, the accountants, the financial folks, high percentage of those positions have degrees. And again, that's another example, as I was talking about, where a lot of the people who will start in some of my entry-level positions related to patient registration or billing or collections or what have you are degreed, even though the job doesn't require the degree. Again, knowing full well that their goal is to learn what it means to do patient collections at the front end when you're meeting someone face to face, because that helps you then as you progress. So again, in terms of the number of positions percentage-wise from a degree standpoint, probably about 30% require it, but it's always one of those things as you're looking for that demarcation that makes the person better than the person they're competing against. And that's where the degree, even if it's not required, kind of puts that person ahead of someone else that they're competing with who may not have acquired that degree.
Thank you. Mr. Dixon?
Traditionally in the supermarket industry, it really hasn't always been a requirement to have a bachelor's degree or higher to find success in your career. However, that's changing, and that's changing for my company as well. The supermarket industry is one that is quite competitive from the standpoint of generating profit margins. And so we find ourselves really looking for the brightest and the best minds that are coming out of college. But we also look at our internal incumbent group of employees as well and promote education to them by way of helping them through scholarships and internal programs that we have for them to achieve their education as well. If I had to put a numeric value on the percent of jobs that require a bachelor's degree or higher, I'd say for us it's about 15 to 20%. For the future, I feel like that number will continue to grow.
Mr. Mullins?
Well, let me kind of go up to a little higher altitude on how I would answer this, because I'm looking across all these specific industries. National surveys have shown repeatedly over the last 10, 15 years that 70 to 80% of the jobs that are going to be created going forward the next 25, 30 years will not require a 4-year degree. They will require at least 1 or 2 years after high school. So just getting a high school diploma is not going to cut it. Getting a 4-year degree may or may not cut it, but at least have a year or two of some kind of technical training or certification. We've talked here, Gary mentioned the baby boomers retiring. I can just think of not only Eastman, but in Tyler here, Delic, the big refinery in the northeast part of the city, Luminant which has a training academy on the TJC West campus, which is a power generator here in East Texas. They're the ones who make the lights go on in this room and all over North Texas. They're desperate. They're getting, these baby boomers are retiring in huge numbers, and the pipeline is not adequate to fill those jobs. Now, some of those jobs will be covered by technology, but a lot of them are jobs that are out there for the asking. I saw in the Dallas Business Journal that I got this week, here's an interesting headline. The energy sector expansion in this country, you know, all the shale plays, not only in Texas, but in North Dakota and Pennsylvania and New York and all around, will require Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad to hire 5,000 more people in the next couple of years. That's just a railroad responding to the growth in the energy sector. And those are high-paying jobs. So, you know, it's kind of a mixed bag. You're all looking at us thinking, wow, all those old people who've worked for decades, like myself, and are leaving. How come I'm having such a hard time getting a job? You know, my son was out in Washington, D.C. He was a good student, graduated from A&M, communications and business, early with honors. Took him 2 years out in Washington to find a full-time job that was connected to something he was interested in. So he had to do things like volunteer, do internships without pay, do part-time work, do special projects, just to build that resume, so he finally became interesting enough for someone to hire him.
And that's actually a perfect segue into my next question. And I'd like each of you to speak to this question of experience. And we'll start with you, Mr. Mullins. But you know, I think for a lot of students who are looking at jobs right now, they're finding that just about every position that they want to apply to is requiring 2 to 3 years experience or 3 to 5 years experience. And so many of them are asking, well, how am I going to get a job if I need experience to get a job? So what can students do while they're still in college to get meaningful experience that will help them stand out so that when they graduate, they have a little bit of experience under their belt to help them land that first full-time job?
You know, I think it starts in junior high school. I think kids need to start volunteering for community projects, get involved in extracurricular stuff in school, and then continue that right through their university or their technical training experience. Just to have something on your resume that shows you've been out there, that you've interacted with potential other workers in a work environment, clients, customers, and then present well when you have an opportunity to interview. But anything you can do to get some connection to some experiences is critical.
I agree with Tom. All experience for us is good experience. It's a matter of how you present that. Those that can work while they're in college, in our business we have lots of entry-level positions, but we also have paid internships also. Those are fewer in number, but if you can get one of those internships, it's really a great opportunity for you to gain some exposure to our company, but also it's a great way for us to see the value that you bring. And our company generally promotes from within, so oftentimes you may have to take a lower level position just to open up that door for you, and then once you have that exposure, then it's a little easier for you to advance to those higher level positions. But again, I think it's a matter of how you value what experience you have, whether you actually have that experience coming from an employer or from volunteer work, et cetera. It's all how you present it.
You know, I would be willing to bet that most folks would agree that when it comes to kind of counting that experience, because when you look at a job, it says, required X years of related experience, and the question is, well, how do you define related? And I would be willing to bet that most organizations are pretty liberal in that, definition of related experience, because the idea is you want to throw that net wide enough that you're going to get good candidates and you can get quality folks that you can kind of compare against one another. And so the things that we've mentioned related to volunteer work, well, that may not be a one-for-one kind of a counting towards your experience. It comes into play, and a lot of organizations, and us included, will look at folks who volunteered in healthcare, and we'll count that towards part of that related experience. And we'll look at that, the time that they spent doing some of those, entry-level positions. It's funny, if you go to our transportation department, which are the people who push the patients around, you see a lot of individuals whose desire is to go to medical school or whose desire is to go to nursing school, and they do that for two reasons. One is they get them a good feel for what it's like to kind of be in the hospital, but it also starts building that experience, that relevant experience. And it also starts to make the connections, as Terrence mentioned, in terms of recruiting from within. We have a lot of individuals who we hire into our professional, our technical jobs, who started doing something else as they were in school. And they made sure that they had a good track record while they were working there, and that they got to know people. And so when they graduated with their degree plan, they were able to say, okay, now I'm going to go talk to Supervisor X, who I've kind of really worked on making sure she knows who I am, and then have started to kind of plant that seed that when I graduate with my degree in X, I'd be interested in working for you. So there's a lot of that work that goes on as well, because it's not easy. I understand that we get numerous applications for every single position we post, and so you're really looking for that thing that makes someone special and unique and stand out. And when it comes to experience, that really is someone who's worked for me before. I'm going to really put a lot of weight on that, because then I know what I'm getting.
Okay. Well, since this is mainly a college crowd, I'll confine my comments to mainly entry-level positions. And like Terrence, with Brookshire's, we have paid internships at Eastman, so we're always looking for interns, and not only for interns that work for Eastman, but when we review resumes and take applicants for our business and technical positions, I'm looking for folks that have done internships with other companies if they've had the opportunity. You may not always have the opportunity to do an internship with another company. If you can take jobs on campus, that's one thing we look for. If you can work with a professor on campus and put that on your resume, that's good. But another one of the things, and I think Tom mentioned this right off the bat, is sometimes it's not always paid work experience. Sometimes it's what organizations are you in, either on campus or civically or at church. Have you had a leadership role in organizations? That goes a long way for helping us to sort of establish, okay, how does this person fit in with what we're looking for? Because we're looking for people that have some leadership capability, that have teamwork is one of those high criteria that we can look and say, well, they've been a member of this, they've done this. And so while that's not necessarily work experience when it comes to an entry-level position, you take all those things into account just to see how well-rounded you are as a candidate overall.
Well, whenever you're applying for a job, you typically see a list of required skills and qualifications, but there are a lot of other elements that go into selecting the right candidate, intangibles, things like personality and how well their attitude fits in with the culture of your organization. How important are those intangibles, and do you often find yourself hiring people that maybe don't have the exact skills that you're looking for, but feel like a good fit for your organization?
I'll take a stab at that one. In our industry, certainly there are certain jobs that require certain skills that you just have to bring to the table. And some of those positions are more specialized, more professional. But then, for example, in our retail sector, we tend to look for personality. We're going to teach you the mechanics of actually performing your actual job duty, but some things, they're a bit more difficult to teach. And so in our retail operations, we look for personalities that are engaging. You don't necessarily have to always be an extrovert to have success in that area of our business. We've taken a lot of introverts, myself included, and brought out the best in them. And so those things that make you uniquely different are valued in our company. And so it's difficult to say that you have to have a set personality or set innate skills. We'll work with just about any and every individual that wants to work in our industry.
One of the things that we always talk about is we hire for attitude. the work that his company does on customer service is very well known, and it's something that we actually want to learn from them, because you see it if you go into the Brookshire stores, where customer service is extremely important to that culture. And so we feel the same way, in that when we're looking to hire someone, hiring to fit goes so far beyond technical skills. I always talk to our new employee orientation group that we do, that there's a lot of people who can do the jobs that we hire people to do. The reason we hire them is because we hire them for their attitude, or their personality, their ability to communicate. As you think about within each of our hospital system, our hospitals, our physician's office, communication with the patients is a very, very important thing, because very few people want to be in a hospital. There's very few times you want to actually get services from my company. And so when you're there, you need to have someone who really is empathetic and focused on service and focused on you. So the technical skills, extremely important, but I would say almost to some degree they're secondary to what I'm looking for when I'm trying to hire someone who's going to be a fit in my organization.
Let me say amen to something I just heard Tom say, and that's communication. If you can communicate, you're going to go a long way. I don't care what your technical skill set is. I'll choose a person with a much lower GPA if they can communicate a lot better than the other guy. And Andy, you alluded to job fit and how well do you fit in the organization. And most organizations, and I know what we look for when we're looking for engineers, let's say, you got to have that good technical skill. I mean, that's a must. You can't come without that. But you also can't come unless you can communicate really well and work on a team. If you're one of those folks who really works well by yourself and you want to be put in the lab and not bothered, there are places for those people out there, but it's not at our company. And so if you can communicate well, you've probably gone a long way, especially in an interview, to securing a job.
Mr. Mullins, did you have something to add to
Yeah,
that?
let me add it from a more targeted response for the work that we do. The organizations I represent are like the Economic Development Council, the Chamber of Commerce, and then part of that is the Convention and Visitors Bureau. So we're constantly having interns, workforce. The last 4 people I've hired in the Economic Development Organization have come from this campus. I don't even advertise the job, because I've had good luck finding people with the technical skills, and then I'll teach them either the Economic Development or the Chamber or the Convention Visitors Bureau stuff, but they also have to have those soft skills. And I've had both experiences. Some people I'll hire, they're great with technical stuff, good computer skills, but they don't have good soft skills, communication, teamwork, those kinds of things. There's an interesting adage, and Tom, you might remember, we talked about this with the Human Resource Roundtable that you're a part of, that says you get hired for technical skills, but you get fired for soft skills. In other words, you can be very good at what you do, but if you can't communicate and be a team member and be a self-starter and do all the things that it takes to show your employer that you're valuable, you're not going to keep that job.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit to a more practical question that we received, which is, for somebody who has applied to a job, they've got an interview. What are your expectations for that interview? What should they bring? What do you expect them to know about your organization? And how should they follow up, or should they follow up afterward? We'll start with our HR managers. Mr. Dixon.
I would encourage you to remember that you're being evaluated from the first contact that you have with that prospective employer, whether that's submitting your application or resume, or whether that's showing up for the interview. You're being evaluated. You may not necessarily be evaluated by the interviewer, but others in the organization as well. I would encourage that individuals that come to interview with us present themselves in a manner that would be well received. So if you're looking for opportunities within our corporate office, be familiar with what the attire is. Make certain that your resume and your application really emphasize the skills that you want us to hone in on. Make certain that you're engaging and you're cordial, even with anyone that you come in contact with. I'll kind of tell you a little technique that I've used in the past. When people have come to interview with me, the first person that they would come in contact with is a sweet lady who is our receptionist. And she would actually pre-screen folks for me. And if people didn't speak or if they were rude, but then they came in to visit with me and they presented something completely different, afterwards I would talk with her about her encounter, and she would often share something that was completely different than what I experienced in the interview. And so I realized that when people come to interview with me, they generally are bringing their best, but we want to see that best at all times. And so my encouragement to you is, be prepared.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, is that when someone is actually finally made it to the interview piece, the entire process is part of the selection. I often think about the interview itself as probably the worst selection tool that we have, because it's a very subjective, you take away if you do testing and the like, but it's very subjective kind of an evaluation of the individual. And so you have to put lots of things around it to try to see what's this person like. And so, are they treating everyone that they come into contact with respect? So if it's the receptionist, if it's the person that they interact with on their way into the office. And so all of those things, you'd be surprised how frequently people talk about, oh, that's the person for job X. And, if you were not respectful and polite at any part during that time when you got out of your car and you came into the interview, that's going to be known, and folks talk about it. And so I always encourage people that that selection process is the entire time. I never cease to be amazed by what people wear to interviews. And it was funny. I was in a meeting earlier this week, and we were talking about our entry-level positions in food, nutrition, and environmental services. And we were just talking about how do we make sure, because summer is a big time for turnover, and so we're trying to working with the Workforce Commission, really trying to make sure we're ready for that. And the manager were talking about how they had a job fair, and some candidates showed up on their way to the beach, and it looked like they were on the way to the beach. And people think, well, it's in housekeeping, so what? I mean, no, that there's a presence, that there is an expectation of appearance, that doesn't matter what job you have, the way that you portray yourself is important for an organization, and that starts with how well you do it at that interview process. And so I always encourage people to kind of think through that entire spectrum of who they're going to be interacting with and how that fits into their selection.
Yeah. I'm not sure I can add a whole lot more to what these two guys said, although we probably do need to swap stories about what people wear to interviews, because there are some really good ones. Just keep in mind, we're looking for, as people who are interviewing you or assessing you or evaluating you, we're really looking to see what are you going to bring to the company, and that could be different things for different people. The way we typically select people for entry-level positions is usually I will interview them typically on campus, and then go back to my hiring managers with my assessment, and then they sort of go through everything and they pick out who they want to bring to the site to interview, and then you may have to go through interview with 4 or 5 different people when you come to the sites, and where we've got a lot of our best feedback is, as you guys were just talking about, it is not necessarily through the interview notes. It's when a couple of our people take the candidate out to lunch and get to know them well, and they can really drill down on some informal stuff and find out things that our interview questions would probably never find out. And that's probably the most a revealing thing that I can think of, but I don't know that I can really add much more.
Mr. Knowles?
In preparation for today's panel, I was talking with the Texas Workforce Commission people, and they gave me some ideas. And these are common sense things that I think you should all know. I'm just curious, how many people in here have been in a job interview? See, just about everybody raised their hand. How many have had a root canal? Which one do you prefer? being in a job interview is a very traumatic experience. But there's some simple things that you can do. And the technology will help you do this. One is spell check your application letter and your resume. Pretty obvious. People don't do it. Second thing, because of Google and any other search engine, do a little research on the company that you're going to be talking to, or the nonprofit, whomever you're going to be interfacing with in the interview. Come in with some prepared questions that you'd like to know more about the company and this prospective employer. And one of those questions should not be, what's the salary range? You can find that out on your own, or you can touch on that at a later, more appropriate time. And this, some helpful hints. When you're in the interview, make eye contact, sit forward, don't lean back with your legs crossed and your hands kind of hanging over the side of the chair. Look serious, be confident. It'll make an impression.
Those are one thing about what Tom just said. He mentioned spell check, but and you guys have probably seen this before, but I've gotten resumes before. Example would be, and I'm recruiting for Eastman Chemical Company, and I've received resumes before where the objective statement is to get an entry-level position with Shell Chemical Company. Oops. I don't think I've thought a whole lot of that resume.
Well, Tom, I'm glad that you mentioned salary expectations. I know that that's something that is on the mind for college students. Something that I did, and I'm certain that some of the students in the room have done, is when you're applying to a job, you immediately do research to see, well, what is this going to pay? That's not something that's typically advertised on the application, but it's something that students want to know what they can expect going in, especially for jobs that ask for what the students or the applicant's salary expectation is. How much stock should students and any job applicant put into the stuff that you find online about how much this position probably pays? And just as an addendum to that question, how much fluctuation within most entry-level positions do you have? Is the salary typically set, or is there some room for negotiation?
It's interesting. Marilyn, Albert, and I were just talking about this because we hire through this campus so much. We talk to students, and professors will tell you the student who's about to get that degree thinks they're worth a lot more than they are. And they do so. I just turned down hiring a student from this campus because of unrealistic salary expectations. And what they did some great homework. They did an analysis of salaries for recent MBA graduates in major markets. And they came in with a pretty high number. And I looked at that number and I said, but you're not in a major market. You're in Tyler, Texas. And in Tyler, we can get those degree sets with experience at a more competitive price. And employers are going to do that. And the reason we're going to do that is because there are multiple applicants all the time. We have choices. So be very realistic about those salaries and make sure if you're doing homework on salary ranges that you take into account the cost of living and the local variables that impact what people are hiring at in this area. And the last thing, to your last question, Andy, we do have flexibility. We generally will consider there's a range, maybe starting salary 35 to 45,000, higher skill set maybe 55 to 60,000. But if someone comes in with some compelling argument, we'll find a way to move up if we have to, and we have that flexibility.
I agree with everything Tom has said. Specifically for us, we encourage that if you have a resource in our company that can maybe give you a little insight, that's certainly helpful, because my experience is that not all positions are created equal. And a lot of it does depend upon, like Tom said, the geographic area, but also the industry. And I mentioned earlier that in our industry, profit margins are pretty slim, and they average 1% to 2%. So we have to be very, very astute business people to generate profit. And so because of that, we're not like some industries that may have higher inflated salaries. We try to remain competitive. We pay a good wage and a good salary for most positions, but it's good to have a little insight on the industry as well. Also, negotiation for me is expected. Experience, certainly, the more you have of it, the more able you are to negotiate higher salaries. But even if you don't have that experience, I would expect for you to negotiate some.
I think my least favorite website is salary.com. Because everybody who goes there comes in with, I think, I guess it's an overgeneralization, but it has a tendency to provide some unrealistic expectations related to compensation, because if they're not, based upon market, and it's just a general, and may not necessarily identify specifics related to experience and the like. So, I think it is good to come in with an expectation of salary. I think to Tom's point, be very careful, because there are folks who we won't move past the first initial screening if they've got a salary expectation that's beyond where I'm going to be able to get. Because I think we don't want to go down the road of kind of falling in love with a candidate and then realize that they're $20,000, $30,000 out of our price range, and so we've basically wasted our time and their time. So that's a very important thing to be thinking about. I frequently, people think, well, I don't want to lowball it because then I'll come in less money than I think I could have gotten if I was putting a higher rate. For us, we come in with some pretty standard pay scales and structures and things of internal equity. And so for me, I know the least I'm going to pay for a job. And so if someone comes in and says that they'll take X and I pay higher than that as part of my range, I'm going to offer the higher rate. Just the way that the way we're structured, and some organizations are like that. So again, don't spend a lot of consternation on kind of lowballing it, if you will. I think for us, negotiation, there is some negotiation, probably more so when the person has experience, and then they can point to the very specific experience that they can bring to the table. When you have positions that have multiple incumbents, that comes into play. I need to be mindful of what I'm paying a 20-year experienced nurse compared to what I'm paying someone right out of school. And so negotiation is there to some degree, but again, in my world, for some of the technical jobs, there's not that much, because I have so many incumbents that I need to be mindful of internal equity, that I can't just offer one person something and then because I'm going to have to increase everybody as well, so I'm going to have to keep that equity.
Yeah. Well, we are talking about entry-level positions, mainly for people coming out of college. So, number one, forget most of those online sites, especially for our technical degreed positions. There are national market averages and ranges for us, especially for the engineers that we hire. There is no negotiation. We know what we're going to offer, and that's the offer. I would say probably one of the best sources you can have is your career services. So I'm giving somebody a plug out there. Your career services or department at your campuses may have salary information. So for you engineers, if there are any in here, let me just go ahead and tell you, $60,000 to $75,000 a year is the range that you can expect for most of your engineering degrees, depending on what degree it is. But whatever offer you get, it's not going to be a negotiable offer coming right out of school. Now, after you've been out in the working world several years, okay, things change, rules change, but not right out of school.
One of the great unknowns for an applicant is what the competition looks like. How many people are applying for this job? Am I going up against 100 people with the same qualifications that I am? And so I'm just curious, how many applicants do you typically interview when you get to the interview stage? And what can an individual do to make themselves memorable in a positive way and not for the outfit that they wore?
It just depends on the job that we have available. Some jobs are more desirable than others. I would say on average, we post internally and externally. And so our internal postings, we generally see a few less applicants. The average position, I would say we may get 15 to 20 applications. We operate outside of Tyler also, oftentimes in smaller communities, and so relocation sometimes is a factor for us, and not everyone is able nor interested in relocating, so sometimes that reduces the number of applicants that we have. When we post externally, that number can be in the hundreds. It just depends on the opportunity that we post. The second part of your question, Andy, what can a candidate do to be memorable? For me, I like individuals that are prepared, that know something about our organization, that really can come to that interview and really effectively communicate what they can bring to help make our company better. And so to me, it's how you present yourself in that interview as a part of that process that will make the lasting impression on the person who is facilitating that interview.
I would say that for our professional kind of roles, we probably average, let's say, about 5 to 10 applications a week. Obviously, we don't interview all of those folks. We screen them. So it really kind of depends upon the position. Also depends upon the time of year. Obviously, when folks are graduating, that's obviously a more a higher volume of applications. And so, I think that we don't have a set number of folks that we're going to interview in most cases. It really depends upon how well the candidate pool is doing. If we get 10 applications and our recruiters are pre-screening them and we like them and we do phone screens, we may stop at 10 and kind of see what that looks like. Because what we don't want to do is pre-screen, 30, 40, 50 candidates for a job, and then, after the first or second one, you've kind of made your selection, or then you've got all these folks that you've pre-screened and potentially angered, and there are future applicants for other positions as well. So we want to be real mindful that we don't want to have too many people who are kind of in play, if you will, for a position. And I think the memorable component, again, it really is kind of setting yourself apart from the other candidates in terms of how you act in the interview. I've talked about the communication piece. I think right now, if I were to say what's the one thing that I'm actually seeing decrease with applicants and candidates that are new to the workforce is it's the ability to communicate in a very straightforward, looking people in the eyes, simple things, complete sentences, and things that when you're interviewing 10, 15 people for a position, the folks who are very knowledgeable, thoughtful in their responses, and have realistic expectations stand out. I have a lot of individuals who really, they come into an interview and, the standard question is kind of, where do you see your career going in the next, 5 years? And in 5 years, well, I plan on graduating and I'll be a director within a year, and then I'll be a VP within 3, maybe 4. And there are some unrealistic expectations. And again, those things, they resonate, because then you're going to get someone who's not necessarily going to be happy in the role. And that speaks to me, someone who's coming in thinking that they're not going to really be able to learn the business, if you will. So from a memorable standpoint, folks who come in and really understand the business and what it's going to take to be able to be successful really does help them stand out.
Yeah. For entry-level jobs, I probably review well over 1,000 resumes a year. I can probably boil that down to maybe 100 to 150 campus interviews that come out of that, and then maybe 30 on-site interviews. So that sort of shows you how we funnel it all down to where you can actually get an on-site interview for one of our technical positions. And I think we've talked about a lot of the things on the resume and the interview that might help you stand out. Obviously, as we've mentioned 2 or 3 times, if you're a highly technical person and you can sit across from somebody and look them in the eye and talk to them and ask good questions. You're not there just to answer questions. I'm really impressed when I get folks that can ask really good questions, like what do you typically see from a person in this position during their first year? If I perform well, what are the career paths that are out there? What do you do in a typical day? Why have you been with the company so long? The more they're engaging with you, the interviewer, the more likely you're to find favor with them and remember them over all the hundreds of other interviews you're going to be conducting over several weeks.
Just a couple of additional points, though. One is we don't advertise in general periodicals or newspapers or general websites. And the reason we don't is that we just get 90% of the responses are not even going to be close to the skill sets that we've advertised. People, I don't know if they just ignore the parameters you have in the job description,
They do.
or they think they can convince you that even though they don't have those skills, you'll hire them anyhow. So we don't bother. What we do is, like I said, we'll post or have communicate directly with the colleges out here at UT Tyler. We'll post on targeted professional websites. And when it comes down to interviewing, the most that we would interview would be 3 to 5 per each position.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I wanted to open it up in case anybody in the audience has any questions that they would like to ask. Now is an opportunity to do so. Questions? Yeah, just raise your hand.
I noticed a lot of the responses you had today is once you get to the interview. My question is, what do you look for in those resumes that really stand you out, want to pull a candidate in for that interview?
Great question. Thank you.
Well, I'll start since you got to start on all the other ones.
Sure.
All right. Actionable kinds of things on their resume. Results, and I know it's hard to do early in a career, but things where saw an improvement in XYZ, or did something and here was an outcome. And so that's where you mentioned if you're part of social organizations or you're volunteering, where there's specific outcomes that you can show as opposed to just the general was a part of this group or did a job that did XYZ. What for me really stands out is someone who can show that they did something and that there was a measurable outcome, regardless if that's in employment or if that's in a social situation, a fundraising goal that they did as part of their social fraternity or sorority, things of that nature are one way to do that.
Yeah, quantifiable things that you can see some numbers down there maybe behind what you've done in the past. But with us, it's very much have you taken on a leadership role in organizations that you have been in, and once again, this can be church groups. This can be all sorts of different things. It doesn't have to be directly related necessarily to the job, especially if it's an entry-level job. We wouldn't expect you to have had that many jobs in the past. But typically, when I scan a resume, to even get in the pile that says we may consider, and most recruiters, they can do this in 20 or 30 seconds. I hate to scare you like that, but sometimes that's all your resume gets looked at. But basically, it's major GPA, leadership roles and things, past work experience, have they done an internship, other organizations they've been involved with. Especially if it's a technical job, we don't need fancy fonts or borders on our resume, okay? Now, if you're in creative design, wonderful. If you're a mechanical engineer, not so good. So those little things like that sometimes will stick out. But as Tom said, certainly if you can quantify things, raise membership in the ASME organization by 25% when I was president of that organization last year, and those types of things, those leap off the page of a resume to sort of get us some interest. Because like I say, in 30 seconds, I'm going to know everything I want to know about you, and I'm moving on to the next resume.
Well, Mr. Dixon, we have a question from the audience specifically for you. Someone wrote, you say you're always looking for quality people to come work for you, be it entry level or professional. What do you constitute as, quote, quality, and what red flags do you avoid when looking at these individuals?
It's a great question. For us, we do some pre-screening of all potential candidates. So we do drug testing and background checks, criminal background checks. So you first have to get over that hurdle. If you can get over that hurdle, Then, as it relates to quality, we're looking for individuals that don't mind serving, whether that's in our corporate offices or in our retail stores. I see a few familiar faces in the audience that work for us, and in our corporate operations, we serve our retail stores. We help them to be able to facilitate that customer's needs. So it's all about service with us. So we're looking for that, that quality servant's heart, that willingness to go the extra mile to help, whether that's another employee or a customer.
Great. Do we have any additional questions from the audience? In the back.
You'll talk a little bit about salary negotiations. Can you talk about a little bit about if you have someone that you offer a position to, if they do want to negotiate just a little bit, not needing to break the $30,000 or $40,000 if you didn't know, how does someone go about bringing that up without kind of being disrespectful or just opening up that conversation?
That's a very good question. Generally for me, I know it's an awkward question to bring up, so usually I bring it up and try to put that candidate at ease. And like Tom said, we do have positions that have defined salary ranges, and so I'm open and upfront about that. But I feel like oftentimes when the interviewer opens up that discussion, it makes it a little bit easier. But you know, I think I heard Tom mention that you've got to go into that interview confident. You've got to be able to articulate and communicate effectively. So if you're not real comfortable engaging in that conversation, you got to practice and work on it.
You know, I think an easy way to do it is, you know, when you get an offer, and so from us, the offer is going to come from our recruiters. So when a recruiter is going to call, they're going to offer you the job, and they're going to talk salary. And you know, it's very appropriate to, one, express, you know, your gratitude for the offer, and you know, thank you, this is really exciting. You know, I was thinking the salary, I was looking for something a little bit higher than that. Again, it's, you put your, you know, you got the door open, and then the recruiter will ask, well, what were you thinking about? And then it really becomes a very easy conversation that recruiters have had hundreds of times over. But again, so long as you go into it with that kind of an entry, for me, I think that makes it a very easy conversation.
Let me give you another option too. Go to the interview with the idea that you don't have to get everything you're asking for right away, and it's an either or number. Talk about maybe starting at a little bit less than you were expecting, but asking if after a 90-day probationary period or 6 months or a year, if there's a potential to move up into a higher level if you perform well. You know, as you put it back on yourself, but you get them thinking about being more flexible in terms of moving you through the process more quickly.
Great. I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions from audience. Back here.
You also spoke about some things that y'all like to see on resumes. What are some things that y'all do not like to see on resumes?
Did y'all get that?
I'll give you my pet peeve. My goal in life is to work for Tyler Economic Development or Tyler Chamber of Commerce. When I see that, I just know that's not sincere. So that whole goal thing that some people put on their resumes, I'd keep that somewhat generic. The other thing on a resume, if it's beyond 2 pages, I put it in a separate pile. I'll look at that later.
Amen.
Because if people think they are so experienced and so valuable that they got to hand you a 5, 6+ page resume, that gives me a different signal about who those people really are, and I'll put them off to the side. So those are 2 things that I look for.
Yeah, you better have a PhD in nuclear engineering if you want to give me a 4-page resume, because, you know, I'm not going to be looking at it.
I would also say avoid giving too much personal information. You know, hobbies and family and things of that nature really aren't best placed on your resume. Skillful interviewers know that there are certain questions that we cannot ask, and so if you volunteer a lot of that information on your resume, it just puts the interviewer in an awkward position, because now they have access to all of that, but then we're not going to question you about a lot of those personal things either. I think Gary mentioned that, you know, oftentimes a more informal setting, like a lunch or some type of event like that, is the more appropriate place to maybe get to know a candidate better. So avoid too much personal information.
Yeah, and you know, we've mentioned the misspelling, and you know, one of the things also that I always suggest people avoid is having mom call for them. Oh, we get it a lot. You know, my daughter was applying for a job, and you're going to be interviewing, and she's really, really good. And we get that, especially even if it's an internal, and I think there's a tendency for people to try to, kind of use their internal connections and have someone make a call on my behalf, which sounds good, but again, if it's a personal kind of a call, which sometimes you'll get, that really works against you, because it's like, okay, so then if I hire you, mom's going to call me every single time I have to have a conversation with you about something. So while I say it in jest, it is actually something that I do see more and more often these days is the kind of personal reference from folks like that.
It's okay to have referrals. It just doesn't need to be a parent or a relative. But referrals are actually really good. Somebody calls me up and says, hey, I know this person that'd be really good in this role. Well, I'm going to remember that person's name when I eventually do see their resume. And one thing, please put on your resume is email address or phone number or something, so we know how to reach you, because you'd be surprised how many people leave that sort of thing off. We do need to know how to reach you.
Great. Well, I think we've got time for one more question. We have it? Sure.
Okay, from personal experience, how do you feel about the follow-up? Like, let's say you turn your resume, what's the appropriate time to do that? Is that annoying? Am I annoying people right now because that's not
That is a good question. It's not annoying. We get a lot of those. It's nice to get those, especially if you've had a site visit and you've met with several people who have interviewed you. Please, it doesn't have to be an elaborate note. But it's not a bad thing to do. In fact, the resume etiquette professionals will actually have courses on how to construct a follow-up note. Maybe a little overboard, but yeah, it's not a bad touch.
And we've talked about how do you make yourself stand out, because you do get a lot of follow-up emails or handwritten notes, and there's a fine line, but one of the things that I see that sometimes does really help make that person stand out is if they can refer back to some question that you had in the interview that I was thinking more about, or something to the effect where you can kind of connect back to the specific conversation that you had, as opposed to I just sat down and wrote down thank you notes for all the interviews I had this week. It's helpful to kind of bring you back to, I remember that conversation with that person, and they kind of elaborate. Now, you don't want to go into a 3-page dissertation on what that means, but again, to me, that helps that the person has been thinking about the interview and the role.
I also agree. I think it's a great courtesy after you've had an interview. For me, a lot of the folks that write a handwritten note, they register with me. And the reason I say that is I get so many emails, and it's so easy to hit delete. But if someone writes a note, I'm going to hang on to that for a while. And so to me, a handwritten note actually causes that interviewer to pay a little bit more attention to you.
As long as it's legible.
As long as it's legible.
Yeah, I agree. I think the note's a professional courtesy. And I think beyond that, if you haven't heard something for a week or 10 days, one follow-up might be appropriate. But after that, you can kind of assume that it's probably not going to happen. And it's incumbent upon us on the other side, too, to be courteous and at least give you some status report at some point. So you're not just never hearing back as to what went on, what decision was made. One thing I would caution you not to do, just don't show up at the office randomly, saying I just happened to be in the neighborhood, thought I'd come in, see how things were going. That's not a good move. So if you're not hearing back after 1 or 2 attempts, and the company doesn't have the courtesy to tell you that the position's been filled, then just go on to the next opportunity.
All right. Well, with that, we will conclude our discussion for today. I want to thank our panelists for being here and sharing so much incredible insight. I hope it's been very helpful to each and every one of you here. I want to thank you all for coming to the very first Talon Talks, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks.